all right, if I go work for company A, I could make $100,000 a year, but I don't get any stock. If I go work for company B, I could go make 70,000. I'm going to own 4,000 shares if I stay all 4 years. So how much salary are you missing out in 4 years?
This is the Industry of UX, Season 2, Inside the UX Hiring Journey. We talk to the experts to bring you the strategies, the thinking process, and the reasoning behind the hiring decisions in the UX job market. Let's dive into the episode. Hello, you wonderful UXers. Welcome back to another episode of the Industry of UX. I'm your host, Filippo Lovotti. It's great being here with you today. So we started this season talking to Adrienne Hunter Wong specifically about UX hiring for startups. During our chat, we briefly covered startup-specific compensation, which, by the way, is very different from a base salary and benefits that you get from a regular corporate job. After we recorded the episode, both Adrienne and I felt that there was so much about compensation that we could cover, but we had to leave out. Plus, there is also negotiation, which is a great topic in and of itself. So Adrienne and I decided to record a second episode together. And here we are today. As I mentioned before, today is all about startup compensation and negotiation. So get ready to learn more about stock options, strike price, funding rounds, and how to negotiate during the hiring process so you get the best outcome out of it. Let me know what you think about the episode by tweeting at IndustryUX. No offense to Android users, but if you have an iPhone, give us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us produce a better show and bring the podcast to a bigger audience. Okay, on to the conversation with Adrienne. Adrienne, last time we talked about how you hire for startups and your candidate funnel, and you also brought up compensation when it comes to startups. So we briefly touched on it, just barely. So today, I would like for us to do two things. First off, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into what a startup compensation package entails. And the second thing, dive a little bit deeper in how to negotiate your salary, how to negotiate your overall compensation. So let's start with talking about compensation in a startup. How does that work?
The base salary is usually where people's heads go first. And a lot of decisions and deal breakers happen right up front there. Unfortunately, a lot of job descriptions and postings these days still do not have salary transparency. Although recently I noticed that folks in Colorado, I don't know if a law got passed, but every job description for people in Colorado I've noticed have like salary ranges now, depending on whether you live in the Denver metro area or outside of it. But there's base salary, of course, and then benefits. I would say usually you can expect some range of benefits from both startups and corporate. And that includes medical, vision, dental insurance. In startup land, sometimes you only get medical. I've worked at places where the only thing that they offered was medical. And then it starts to get a little slippery from there. So sometimes you've got a 401k plan or you don't. And sometimes you have matching or you don't. Paid time off as a policy can be widely varying, anything from a set number of days every year to what they call quote unquote unlimited paid time off, which always kind of means that it's just, there are rules, there are boundaries there. It's just not explicit what those boundaries are. It's something that's a little bit more like case by case basis. You kind of have to feel it out, like how much time can I reasonably take off? And then you've got some other tertiary things like professional development, work from home stipend, stuff like that. That's kind of where they part ways. And then it can widely vary with startups depending on their maturity and how long they've been around and how well they're doing. They may or may not offer bonuses. And those bonuses may or may not be based off of company performance or individual performance. And then you've got stock and equity, which works pretty different from what I would say a typical corporate job. If you work in tech and you're in corporate, let's say you work at Microsoft or Facebook, stock equity is going to be part of the conversation, but it works drastically different working for a company that's already public and on the stock market as opposed to a much younger startup where all of the shares are privately held. So that's where a lot of the nuance, I would say most of the nuance exists is in the equity offering.
So, what will be the difference in equity, say, between a startup that has been around for maybe just a couple of years, it's still a small team, maybe you have some angel investors versus the kind of stock or equity package that you can get from a Facebook or an Amazon?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to take a look at, especially if you're somebody who is entertaining a job offer from either of those types of companies. What you're going to see at Microsoft or Facebook is a pretty healthy base salary up front because they have the ability to, afford to pay a pretty good base salary regardless of what position you're in. And they're going to add equity or stock options on top of that as an incentive program. And so the way that they use it is essentially, well, we're already public, you know that our stock's already worth such, amount of dollars. You can either do some back of the envelope math yourself to figure out how many stock units you're being offered, how much that would be cash value. Or I encourage people to just straight up ask when they're in the interview process, what's like the market value in cash of the stock units that you're offering for this position. So you can make an easier comparison of what offer you're getting from a company who can offer that versus a startup where it's not as immediately obvious how much that stock is going to be worth. And there's a lot more factors that play into that, including time. So sometimes it can take a long time for equity from a very early startup to actually become worth a substantial amount of money, if it ever does.
So if I'm applying for jobs and I have a variety of type of companies I can apply to, and especially if I'm applying for startups, what kind of benefits would I get if I actually got a startup jobs that allow me to have stocks versus more of a corporate job that doesn't allow stocks? I know that there are a lot of different other things that to consider between corporate and startup, but specifically for stock, why is it good to have a job that offers stocks?
I would say it's probably somewhat of a personal choice. You can balance salary, bonuses, and stock options and kind of treat them as a scale of how much do I want to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'm going to be making, that I'm going to be pulling in. And that's your base salary and any guarantee that you can get out of a bonus structure. Stock is also not necessarily at that level. It's not so volatile that you could expect to get nothing out of stock units because that public company is established and mature and is probably not going anywhere anytime soon. But you have no real concrete guarantee of how much that stock is going to be worth when you go to sell it. So I think it's when you're comparing, like, let's say you're going to choose between corporate job where they don't offer stock and corporate job where they do, you'll see that there's a little bit of a balancing and weighting in the salary versus the bonus if they offer one versus the stock units. And then it's a matter of, well, how risk tolerant am I? Am I willing to take on the stocks and say, I think that the company, I'm optimistic about the company. I think that they're going in a good direction. I think that it's a good idea to basically place a bet that that stock is going to be worth as much, if not more, than it is the day that you take the job.
That makes a lot of sense and kind of brings up something. What is a good percentage to have of your salary in stocks?
I am so glad that you asked that question. I have a hypothetical scenario that I run people through when I ask you this question. So, and for the sake of this, I'm going to leave out the Microsofts and the Facebooks because I think that mental calculus is honestly a lot simpler. Again, because you have the guarantee of the company's probably not going anywhere. Your stock options are probably going to be worth a fair amount of money. It's more of a safer bet, I would say, than working
Right.
for an early stage company. So let's say that you are really early in, one of the first 10 employees at a new startup. And if you were to go anywhere else, you would be able to demand $100,000 base salary. The startup because they're limited by resources, wants to offer you less of a base salary and offset some of that with equity. So let's say they make you an offer of $70,000 base and they want to give you, they say, 0.4% equity in the company. That's a pretty typical structure for an offering from a really early stage startup. And what it does is it kind of places the onus on you to unpack what 0.4% equity means. So there are some questions that everybody who is talking to early stage startups should be asking at this stage. First of all, how much is 0.4% really? So what you can use to figure that out is how many shares total are there in the company, and then how many shares is 0.4%. So to make the math easy, you can say a million shares in the company, 0.4% of that is 4,000 shares. But you don't get those shares up front either, because these days, an early stage startup who's offering equity as part of compensation will have what they call a vesting schedule, which is just a really fancy term for you don't get all the stock up front. It's measured out over the course of a long period of time, most frequently 4 years. So you'll have a 4-year vesting schedule with what they call a cliff. And what that means is for the first set number of months, it's usually a year, you won't receive any equity whatsoever as compensation. But when you hit your year anniversary, you'll immediately get a quarter of the stock options that they gave you in your offer. So for our case with 4,000 shares, we'd get nothing until our year anniversary, and then we would immediately get 1,000 shares. But you also don't just get the shares, you have to pay for the shares. They're just options. It's called a stock option. And what that means is you have the option to pay for the stock in order to own it. So there's another added layer underneath that, which is what's the strike price? The strike price being however much a single share in the company was worth at the time that you signed your employment agreement. I know this is a lot to unpack. There's a lot of articles online that explain all of this and break it down in really clear, like concrete terms. But so again, going back to our scenario for the sake of us, what that means is we're going to have to work at this company for 4 years to get 4,000 shares of stock. We're going to have to pay for that stock. So let's say the strike price was, a share was worth 10 cents when we started. That's totally within the realm of reasonable strike prices for a startup this early. So we have to pay $400 in order to own the stock that we were offered as compensation. Now, what that turns into is a game of how long is it going to take for that stock to increase in value? And how long is it going to take for you to be able to share those shares of stock, to sell those shares of stock? So what that means is, when I'm thinking about, all right, if I go work for company A, I could make $100,000 a year, but I don't get any stock. If I go work for company B, I could go make $70,000. I'm going to own 4,000 shares if I stay all 4 years, pay up front for them, $400. Then I have to wait an indeterminate amount of time for those shares to be worth something and to be able to sell them so that I can get my investment back out. So how much salary are you missing out in 4 years? You're missing $120,000, which is a lot of money if you think about it. That's why I really encourage people to do the math, because sometimes it just doesn't make any sense if you compare the numbers, just numbers, nothing else about the jobs that you're entertaining. So we would have to make $120,000, taxes not accounted for, off of the shares in order to get, to rake back what we lost by making that choice 4 years ago. Again, there's no guarantee of that happening, right?
10 cents a share should be then at the end of the 4 years be worth how much to get to the 120,000?
Each share needs to be worth $30 in order for you to break even without accounting for taxes.
Wowie. And
yeah.
And is that realistic? Like, what is the likelihood of something like that actually happening?
That optimists would tell you is up to you, because as an early stage employee, you have such a direct impact in the success of the company.
And that's the beauty of it.
And that's the beauty of it. If you take a realist perspective, I'm not sure, especially given what role you'd come in on, that you would actually have that much impact versus market factors, existing competition, mistakes at the executive or board level. There's really common pitfalls in startup funding. So there's pitfalls at your Series A round of funding, which is, not being able to deliver on the promise that you made to investors to get that Series A round of funding, to be able to develop the product offering that you told them that you would be able to. There's another pitfall at Series B, which is that you scaled too quickly or you scaled in an unsustainable way. So there's a lot of things that are outside of your control as an individual contributor when you work at a startup that doesn't necessarily guarantee that startup you join is going to be successful just by virtue of you showing up and starting to work there.
Yep, exactly. So before we move into the negotiation discussion, you brought up a great topic I'd like to expand on, which is startup funding. You talked specifically about Series A and Series B. Why is it important for someone applying to a UX design position at a startup to understand funding and funding rounds?
So, first of all, when you're looking at, startup jobs versus corporate jobs, there's more research that you need to do with startups, in part because of exactly this, rounds of funding. You have to look more critically at the health of the company overall. There's another bet that you're placing by working at startups, which is this company is healthy and financially sustaining itself and has a long enough what they call runway, meaning money in the bank that they can afford to make some mistakes or take some risks and still continue to exist, and for your job to still continue to exist and get paid. So it's really important to look at what round of funding the company has most recently taken. If there's any information available on why they took that funding, what they took that funding for, which oftentimes there's a lot of, startup news these days. TechCrunch, where I'm originally from up in Seattle, we have GeekWire, who reports on a lot of rounds of funding. So there's a website called Crunchbase where you can actually look all of this stuff up. If you find an opening for a company and you're really curious about the health of that company, one of the things that you can start at is going to Crunchbase, looking up their name, and it'll show you the rounds of funding that they've taken in, the sources of that funding, even like the VC funds or the investors that were involved, and the leadership of that company, who's on the boards, advisors, etc. So what you're looking at when you look at, let's say, a startup that formed 3 months ago, brand new baby startup, they're probably running off of what they call a friends and family round of fundraising. So that's quite literally the friends and the family of the people who started the company. And it could be like a couple $100,000. And it was really just like to get the company on its feet, to get the engine turning over, working on concept product development, researching the market, exploring the competitive landscape. They're going to use that money to try to prop up a V1 of the product or the service or whatever that they're going to sell. So what they're looking for is enough of a foothold or a foot in the door with a product and a customer fit to look for more money, but they need a plan for what they're going to put that money, that second round of fundraising that they're going to do. They need a plan or a strategy for what they're going to use that money for. So then you'll do oftentimes a seed round of funding, and that is to really develop and flesh out that product or that service idea. Make sure that for whatever you're offering, you're able to cover everything from, like product support, development, engineering costs, customer success, sales and marketing, yada, yada. So once you've cleared your seed round, you usually start hiring a handful of people. If you've ever seen startup job listing on something like Angel List, where it says, we're a team of 3. We've been around for less than a year. We just closed our seed round of funding. What that means, generally speaking, is we're hiring a couple of people to really hit the ground and really quickly whip out these iterations and get this product up and working, this end-to-end, product or service experience, so that we can start making sure that we've got product market fit. And then your seed money goes towards working on product market fit, rolling into your Series A. What Series A funding rounds really, these days, especially in the last couple of years now, really closely look at is, have you proven that there's traction with your product or service and the audience that you're going after? And if there's sufficient evidence that that's happening, then there are a lot of people that are really happy to give you, $10, $20 million. And then you can go use that money to, again, do another huge round of hiring. And then it starts becoming about like scaling up how many customers you can service. Series B and beyond, growth, just all about growth, pouring money into, could be expanding into a new region, expanding like into a new customer segment. It just totally depends on what the company does and how it's structured. So for you as an individual, when you're looking at, this so-and-so startup just closed their seed round and they're like 6 people, versus so-and-so company closed their Series B round and they're 100 people, and it looks like, they're just doing like 20 things at the same time. They're in rapid growth. It can give you a different lens to look at which job is a good fit for you also. If you think about, would I rather work with the scrappy team of 6 who's on a very limited budget with limited resources, but is earlier in the process of like solving this problem, like really doing all of the good discovery, research and development on the customer or user need and trying to figure out what that solution looks like for them? Or do you want to work at a company that's bigger, better funded, more well established, has the resources to be able to work on multiple different projects simultaneously? And then it starts turning into a matter of, well, which product do you want to work on of theirs, or which team do you want to work on? And is there an opening there? And then you can also expect that they'll be able to afford a higher salary. The stock options become less, but it's more of a sure bet, you could say at that point, that it's going to eventually turn into something that's going to give you a return on that investment.
Okay, I feel like it's time to talk about negotiation now. Let me start with something personal. For most of my life, I've been made to believe that negotiation is actually a battle. So it's you against the other party, and you have to push back and you have to be aggressive. But lately, I've started thinking of negotiation as a form of collaboration. Because if you look at it as a battle, it's really you versus them. And in reality, it's more about getting the best out of each other so that we are both happy with the outcome.
I think that's such a cool way of looking at it. Honestly, if you, step back from the mentality of, I need to maximize everything that I get out of this experience, which first of all, in, working with designers, they tend to be very bad self-advocates. It's like you and I were talking about before we started, it's a lot easier to advocate on behalf of users than it is to advocate on behalf of yourself. It'd be very intimidating to look for a job, especially when you are in a situation where you're under duress or it's urgent for whatever reason. So if you think about it from the perspective of the hiring manager, the recruiter, their ultimate goal is to find not just the best fit for the role that's open, but find somebody who is a longer term investment, honestly. I mean, they want people to be able to stay and want to stay and have everything that they need to stay. And it's kind of one of the main purposes of people ops these days, or HR, is to make sure that everybody has what they need to continue to want to be in the company. So there's a human being on the other end of that negotiation process, and they are looking for a good fit also. They want what's best for you because that's what's best for the company. So I think you can come into negotiations like keeping that in mind, and it will help kind of relieve some of the stress and the pressure of having those conversations. Give them the benefit of the doubt. They want this to work out. They've invested a lot of time interviewing you. So
how do you start a healthy negotiation
while you are applying for jobs? How do you start when you get at that? Because here is another thing I was about to say. When you get at the job offer level, but as you mentioned, like it starts actually earlier than that, right? It starts from the first time you talk to normally to with me. It starts when you talk to the recruiter and they ask you. So they basically first time they screen you, right? And at least for me, that's when I have at least an active formal negotiation when they ask you, so what is the range you're comfortable coming in at? And normally, one of the biggest mistakes that people make at that point is coming in at, looking at the salary that they either want or the salary, even worse, the salary that they are at right now and just bump it up a little bit. And of course, recruiters will tell you that they always want you to get the most out of it. But there is also another side of it where, like, the company is not going to be overpaying you just to make you happy. And, they're looking out for their bottom line. So, one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen people make is that coming in at, just blurting out a number just to, because it feels uncomfortable. It feels almost like dirty, and you don't want to say something that is too high because you're worried that they're going to be, just kicking you out of that conversation right there and then because it's way too much. And so you tend to undervalue yourself, and now they're putting the number down on paper and they circle it, and that's kind of the
Yeah. Yeah, like that scene in Mad Men. I don't know if you've watched Mad Men.
no.
Mad Men's one of my favorite television shows of all time. Highly recommended. For people who have seen it, there's a scene where one of the characters, Peggy, is negotiating her starting salary, and she writes it on a piece of paper and slides it over to the guy on the diner table, and he opens it up, crosses it out, writes his own number, and slides it back. So yeah, I think that's what a lot of people like. Even if you do it over the phone or over email these days, I think it comes across like it feels the same way going through that experience for a lot of people. Yeah, I encourage everyone, and I tell a lot of the students and the folks that I mentor with, the very beginning of thinking about either I'm ready to leave where I'm at or I'm being put in a situation where I need to start looking, is to think about, ignore all other compensation. What base salary do you need in order to have the life that you have, not just survival, but comfort, have a comfortable, good quality of life. And it doesn't matter what you're making right now. If that number is drastically different, that's what you should focus on, is trying to figure out what that number, that range is going to be for you. So different circumstances play into that. Are you the primary earner in your family? How many people are you supporting? Where do you live? What are the kinds of things that you want to be able to afford to do? Or do you have any big expenses or purchases that are coming up? So once you've got a good idea of what that number could be, again, disregarding what you're making now, disregarding what people are offering.
Yep, exactly.
Then when you have that upfront conversation with your recruiter about, the dance between, well, they have a budget in range, in mind for this position, how much are you looking for? You'll feel a lot more comfortable and confident putting that number out there because you know where it came from. It's not something that you just knee jerk like spat out in the heat of the moment because you don't like talking about numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the other thing that you can do if you're shy about saying a number is to ask them what the budget is for the position. And I find 9 times out of 10 recruiters are happy to share that with you, because they are also, again, looking for the best fit for both parties. They are asking you up front because they want to make sure that you're not wasting each other's time, honestly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, like, I had a friend who just went through negotiation, first conversation with the technical recruiter, screener call up front. They just came out of the gate and asked, and they knew immediately because they'd already thought about it ahead of time, put out a number. And it actually turned out that the budget for that position was $10,000 higher. So that's the window that they're focusing on. But the recruiter and that person really appreciated like being able to have an honest conversation about it, so that, again, you like don't get halfway through an interview cycle and find out that they're not going to be able to meet you with what you need, honestly.
Exactly. What I normally do when they ask me that during the first or second conversation is to push back and ask them, what is the range you're looking at? In the past, I made the mistake of blurting out a number or blurting out a range And I wanted to be at the top of that range, of course, but I gave them a wide range so I wouldn't hurt their feelings. And I
Yeah.
thought about pleasing
Yeah.
them instead of, oh my
Yeah.
God, like this is actually the money I need, which is the worst possible way you can look at it. And so normally when I push back and I ask, they ask me, what is the salary you're comfortable at coming in at? And normally I reply, well, what is the range you guys are looking for this particular position? And I have yet to receive a response from someone pushing back on me to actually come up with a number. Normally, they just at that point that's the signal that they need to actually tell you what their range is. And I've heard from recruiters that they actually like when someone kind of pushes back on that, and when someone is aware of their worth, they prefer that because it's a signal that someone has, they're self-aware, they've done their research, they know how much money they can make, they know exactly what they need. And it's a better way to start that negotiation, because even you can argue that any contact with the company until you're hired, and then later when you want to be promoted, that is a negotiation, like a long negotiation there. Interviewing, even when you're presenting your past work, right? Case studies, that's still somewhat of a negotiation.
Yeah, I think you really hit on something important too, which is the clock resets when you take a new job. It resets on promotions and raises. So if you think about, well, my bottom of the barrel, lowest offer that I would absolutely accept is X. But if that isn't sustainable for you for at least a year, because that's how long it's going to take you to get to one of those promotion or raise events, usually, even at startups, like there's no set schedule for these things. They don't have an HR. Sometimes they don't even have a process for promotions and raises. So it's a lot trickier to think about, well, when am I going to have my next opportunity to ask for more money and to make a case that I should be making more money? And that's why you don't want to put your bottom so low that it's not sustainable for you for an extended period of time.
Yeah, exactly. That is a really important lesson. So I know we are getting close to the end of our time together. So I wanted to ask, what else should UXers keep in mind when it comes to negotiation?
Yeah, I think just speaking about, let's say you found your number or your range that you'd be happy with. You told the recruiter up front, it's a good fit. You're moving through the process. Well, some of the questions even that you ask in the interview process, as well as your own research independently on the company and the team that you'd be working on, start thinking about things like, what would you be doing day to day? Would you be working on something that aligns with your professional goals? And how much is that worth it to you? The way that somebody I talked to earlier today phrased it was, is this a 1-year job or a 5-year job? Which is, am I here to check a box and move on, or am I here to get really invested? And invested means having long-term view into, what are my compensation expectations after the second year, third year, and so on? What are my promotion or my growth opportunities as well? So there's a lot of, those intangibles, quality of life and professional development stuff that is going to counterbalance your compensation offering. So when you're thinking about, should I work at company A who's offering me $20,000 less a year, but what I'm going to be working on would be, amazing, enriching experience for me personally, would look amazing in my portfolio. It's an amazing team to learn from. Just seems like a really good professional growth opportunity. You can decide for yourself if that's worth it. Similarly, if you've got competing offers and you're trying to compare them, pros and cons, you can weight it that way. You can say, well, what am I gaining in professional development versus compensation? And sometimes you can even play off of them. And some, more established, bigger companies definitely expect that. Recruiters will tell you, hey, if you're moving further along in the process with another company, we'd like to know, because we want to make sure that we're, getting you through these interviews in a timely fashion so that we can make you a competitive offer if they're going to make you an offer. And then you can actually, if you feel, confident and brave enough to do this, you can go back and forth with those companies and ask for more of whatever's going to make that a better choice for you. It could be more base salary. It could be more equity. It could be signing bonus. Signing bonuses are something that I think a lot of people forget about, but getting some cash up front never hurts.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point, that there is so much more than salary that can be negotiated, right? Benefits and all of that can also be part of the negotiation. So thanks for bringing that back into the fold. I have one last question for you, that this touches more on the soft side of things. How do you manage that little nagging feeling in the back of your head that if you don't accept what they come up with, their offer, if you don't accept that, if you actually stand up for yourself and you speak about what you want for yourself, what is good for you, the fact that they can take that offer back and just move on to someone else. How have you, in your experience, how have you managed that nagging little feeling?
Oh, that's so scary, right? That risk of like, you got this far and you did all these interviews, and what if they just pull it out from under you at the last
Yep.
second because you ask for too much? Yeah, I think again, like first principles, you set a number up front that you want and are comfortable with. They are willing to match you on that. You have some baseline expectations set at that point. That's the anchor for negotiation. If it becomes a matter of maybe the offer that they're making you is bare bones. Maybe it wasn't, there's nothing super exciting about it. Maybe there's no stock or very little stock or no bonuses or whatever it ends up being. Maybe like in my situation, they said, oh, we only do medical and I wear contacts and glasses. So I'm like, what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to like pay for that stuff out of pocket. So yeah, it can be a really scary thing. But I think there's, first of all, one thing that you can do for yourself and that I strongly encourage everybody does, even when you're at a job that is stable and you've got, like the right amount of compensation, you feel like you're being taken care of, you're working on stuff that you're into, still just go put feelers out every once in a while. Go see if there's something else out there that for you would be a bump in salary, a professional growth opportunity, whatever it is that you're looking for, that next step in your career, and go apply for it because you're in the safest spot possible. You have a stable gig. It's not going anywhere. You're not going anywhere. It'll really de-stress and reduce and eliminate a lot of that anxiety that you have in the interview process because you're not banking on this working out. So by the time you actually get to the offer stage, it's not like you walking away from a bad offer has any negative consequences that are going to result in not being able to, like pay rent or feed yourself, right? You are in a really safe spot by applying for jobs when you're already happy with your current one. I know it seems a little bit counterintuitive, but it definitely de-stresses and de-risks interviewing, right? If you're not in a position to be able to do that, at the very least, you have already decided on what you need in order to say yes. And if they're not willing to offer that to you, should you really take that job? Or is it worth it to wait 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, a couple months longer before the right offer comes along? It can be very stressful if you're in a precarious financial situation. But if you say yes to a bad offer sooner, you can actually be shooting yourself in the foot long term. You can get stuck at a job that isn't paying you well enough to make your current situation sustainable. And it might actually be a detour for you professionally that moves you away from the direction that you wanted to go in and might set you back in future job searches. So I know it's like really nerve-wracking, but it is okay to say no to offers. I've done it. I've had bad offers where I was amazed that they had the gall to come back to me and offer me as little as they did. And it was kind of borderline offensive, but it's like a confidence and making sure that you're getting the best deal for yourself. Like look out for number one. You're looking out for yourself. You're not looking out for the company. Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed the episode.